Welcome back to the 2 Months Podcast presented by BioStill and powered by GoGo Sports. I'm your host, Joshua Marshall. Today we have Phil Stockley with us. He's my co-host, and our special guest for our episode today is the TSN Hockey Insider, and he's the co-host of the Ray and Dregs podcast with Ray Ferraro. We have Darren Dreger. Dregs, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. You know, we're early into the first week of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, it kind of opened with a bang, right? With the overtime games that we saw on Monday night. The scoring has been off the charts. It's power play after power play. There's been some feistiness in a few of the games and maybe a surprise or two along the way as well. But that's kind of what the first round is always about, especially the first couple of games of round one.
Yes.
And I don't think that it's been disappointing at all. The hockey has been entertaining.
No, it has been. The power plays are up, scoring's up, kind of like we were talking about before we jumped into the recording here. But I guess we'll start with the Calgary Flames, and then we'll transition over to the situation going on in the NHL playoffs. Where are things at right now with the Flames and Daryl Sutter? It sounded like he was going to speak to the media a couple of days ago. As we record this Friday, he may do something later today. Who knows? But where are things at with him and Sutter going forward with the Calgary Flames in your opinion?
Well, this is going to sound just like bureaucratic nonsense, as I describe it this way. But what there's an internal review that's ongoing. Now, traditionally speaking, what happens at the end of the regular season, you normally roll out your players, which Calgary Flames did, and that's followed by the general manager and the coach. The fly in the ointment is that Brad Treliving decided that, you know what, enough is enough. And he's decided to go his separate ways and perhaps consider what sort of other opportunities might be available to him. So now you've got senior management and ownership going, all right, well, the feedback that we received and what we know probably doesn't bode well for Daryl Sutter. Now, Daryl Sutter has term left on his contract as head coach of the Calgary Flames. So I think the internal review is whether, they keep Daryl as head coach, consider him maybe in some other capacity, or they just cut bait and Daryl's gone and new management hires a coach and you hit the reset button in Calgary. I think a decision on Daryl Sutter is going to be made imminently here. I don't have a specific timeline when I say that. Yeah. Could it be today? Could it be tomorrow? I think that it has to be sooner rather than later because of everything that I've already said. We can talk about, potential general manager candidates internally. Craig Conroy is there. I feel like Craig Conroy should be the next general manager of the Calgary Flames just by virtue of paid dues and how sharp a hockey guy he is, and he's learned from one of the best in Brad Treliving. But the Daryl decision has to be made more likely by ownership than anyone else before they can move forward with, I would say a meaningful consideration of the general manager. Because is Don Maloney, as the overseer now of hockey operations, interested in hiring both a general manager and a coach, or is he going to promote internally and then allow Craig Conroy to make the decision on coaching? That's normally what happens, but in this case, because Daryl has term left on his deal, I think Murray Edwards and ownership of the Calgary Flames are going to have heavy influence on all of this.
Yeah. Phil?
Yeah, so you brought up Craig Conroy's name as a potential GM candidate. Are there any other names out there right now? Like listening to Calgary Flames radio the other day, I saw Mike Fuda's name has come up. I also saw Sean Burke's name has also come up.
Yeah.
What are you hearing on that front for potential candidates?
Well, both those guys, Phil, are qualified, right? Like, Sean Burke for me has been a guy that's kind of waited in the wings, again, paid his dues, has been involved in different management groups around the National Hockey League, but he's never been able to crack that barrier to get into the general manager's chair. Maybe why his name would be speculated on is the past history in Arizona with Don Maloney. So that makes some sense. But beyond that, again, you're talking about a qualified candidate here. Likewise, to Mike Futa. Mike Futa was instrumental in some very good teams with the Los Angeles Kings. So he knows his way around the management circle as well as anyone in the business. I'm always a little skeptical, though, when names like this pop out, because normally what happens, unless there's a slam dunk candidate, excuse me, allergies getting the better of me again.
No worries.
Unless there's a slam dunk candidate, we in the media like to throw out names. Well, this guy might be a good fit. Well, this guy might be a good fit. And normally that's just open speculation and probably isn't actually connected to what's going on. But if Calgary decides to push away from what they have internally in Craig Conroy, then I think it would be wise to consider just about anything and anyone. And when you do that, I mean, you open the possibility of, double-digit candidates. I mean, there are lots of qualified people around the game of hockey who haven't been an NHL general manager, but are ready, and not just ex-players. Jason Carmanos comes to mind with the Buffalo Sabres. I mean, this guy has 3 Stanley Cups. He's more than ready to be an NHL general manager. So if it's not Conroy in Calgary, then they'd be wise to do an exhaustive search and go through the process as efficiently, but as exhaustively as they can to make sure they get the right candidate.
And what do you think happens with Brad Treliving here going forward? Do you think it's a situation that he gets to pick where he wants to go next? Or do you think maybe he takes a year and just kind of relaxes, enjoys life a bit, maybe enjoys, being a father for his daughters and all that?
Yeah. I mean, it could be a little of both, Josh, to be fair. One thing I know about Brad Treliving is he is very respectful of what the position is to be a general manager in the National Hockey League. There are only 32 of them. I mean, it is a coveted job. He knows how heavy the workload is because no one worked harder than Brad Treliving in the office of GM in the NHL. I mean, everybody, including his colleagues as general managers, used to joke that Tree is in everything. If there's trade speculation, you can be sure that the Calgary Flames are involved because Brad never wants to miss out. He doesn't often pull the trigger, although he did that in a big way, obviously, last offseason. But highly regarded executive. He really, truly is. So you got to take the lay of the land here. And, we know that the Pittsburgh Penguins are looking for a general manager. I look at the Philadelphia Flyers. I don't think they're looking for a GM. They've got that in Danny Briere, but they haven't officially anointed Briere as the long-term GM. He's the interim GM, but still, in Philadelphia, they're looking at a president and a head of hockey operations. Could that be something that Brad Treliving would consider? He's got a lot of friends in the business. He's earned a reputation of being an excellent GM. He's battle-worn, battle-tested, and that matters too. Every GM in the NHL has warts. But when you go through the levels of adversity that Treliving has experienced and you come out the other side, well, that's experience that is going to make you better the next time you face a situation that is deemed to be adverse. So I think it would be healthy for him to maybe not jump back into a GM office in the foreseeable future. And by that, I'm talking weeks and months. I'm not talking about a full season. But let's see, what happens here. Disappointment breeds snap decisions in the NHL and in pro sport. We're early into round 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. If a team gets punted, and there's a decision that needs to be made in management, and I guess we could look at the Toronto Maple Leafs when I say this, and I say it out loud. Why wouldn't you consider Brad Treliving if Kyle Dubas decides that he wants to consider something else, or the Maple Leafs decide that, you know what, the Dubas, era hasn't worked. We want to do something different. Brad Treliving is going to have options in the near future.
Yeah, I agree. He is not only an amazing person, I think he's an amazing general manager, and you've dealt with him a lot over 9 years with the Flames, and even his time in with the Coyotes organization. We'll move over to the NHL playoffs. Thoughts on the Leafs' big win last night? Kind of a weird series in a way where both teams that have won game 1 and then game 2 where it's been a
Yeah.
blowout. But I guess your thoughts on the series, and then kind of the comments Cooper made last night after the game about, you know, the 3 centers for the Leafs versus the 3 centers for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's hard to argue the 3 that he has on his side.
Yeah. Yeah, well, especially given their resumes, right?
Yes.
And what they've won in Tampa Bay. So, you know, they get the benefit of the doubt in that regard. And I think that is just squashing the narrative that now Toronto has some mojo. And when you look up the middle of the ice, the way Sheldon Keefe went into game 2, I believe that's the strongest version of the Toronto Maple Leafs. When you've got Matthews, Tavares, and Ryan O'Reilly as your 1, 2, and your 3. Now it required a suspension to Michael Bunting to encourage, you know, the Leafs coach to try this out. You know, he brings Matthew Nyes from the sidelines, who's fresh out of college hockey, into the mix. There's obvious chemistry between O'Reilly and Matthew Nyes. You know, John Tavares clearly feels more engaged and open to play comfortably at center because he had a huge night in scoring the hat trick. Mitch Marner was terrific. Ryan O'Reilly, you know, equaled a Toronto Maple Leaf defensive record by, you know, scoring 4 primary assists. All that's great, you know, all of it. Ilya Samsonov had a bounce back game. I think many expected that he would do that. But here's the most significant takeaway for me. If Toronto hadn't taken advantage of the absence of Victor Hedman and Eric Chernak, they would have lived to regret that, because then obviously the series shifts heavily in favor of the Lightning going back to Florida. And, you know, the old kind of ghosts that haunt the Toronto Maple Leafs are now front and center, especially in this market where, you know, the market seems to feed off negative more than positive. Although that building last night, Scotiabank, was absolutely booming and rocking and was a big part of the success. So I wasn't surprised by the pushback. I would say overall through 2 games, guys, what surprises me most is the fact that we've seen 19 goals.
Yeah.
10 goals in game 1, 9 goals in game 2. The offense, the talent level of both clubs, yeah, you knew that there were going to be goals scored. And if power plays were created, then special teams were going to play a role. I did not see almost 20 goals through 2 games of play. So it makes you wonder what's going to come in the rest of the series here.
Yeah, for sure. So with Cernak out, in our guess is that could be concussion protocol, and that's probably what, 7 days drags. And then, do you know anything or hear anything on the Hedman front? I know it's playoffs. You guys don't get a lot of information, as in the media. We don't get a lot. It's always day-to-day game time decision. But the importance of having them 2 back in the lineup going forward to prolong this series to a 7-game series.
Well, it has to be day by day, because you're right. We're not given the information, and I respect why we're not given the information. Why would you want to, you know, give your opposition any sort of indication as to whether your lineup is getting stronger or it's status quo or it's getting weaker? Now, you know, former players that I deal with on a day-by-day basis say, it doesn't matter. You know, we'd go into playoff games knowing that guys were hurt or wondering, and we're not going to play differently. I respect that, because that's their experience. I just think that if you're Toronto, you have to have more swagger going into game 2, you know, knowing that Victor Hedman likely isn't going to play, and knowing that Eric Chernak isn't going to play, and knowing that, you know, you've got Zach Bogosian coming out of the sidelines. You know, go down the list here. And Darren Radish is going to have to play a more prominent role, and Ian Cole is going to have to eat up more minutes. Yeah, I hate to speculate on Hedman. I think you're right. I think it's pretty obvious that Eric Chernak suffered a head injury. So how long he's out will be symptomatic, and how he's dealing with his issues. I've heard lower body, and I've heard lower to upper body with Victor Hedman, which implies maybe something like a groin injury, maybe something back spasm related. But again, that's just pure speculation, and no one has verified or confirmed that. I mean, we all saw him skate off near the end well, he basically left at the end of the first period,
Yeah.
and then saw him come out early in the second and then left. But he didn't leave under duress. I mean, you didn't see him limping. You know, he didn't seem like he was seizing. And we poured through the video. We went through every shift at TSN, and the only physical contact he had was in the first. And really, it was a bump in the corner with John Tavares of the Maple Leafs, and that was it. So if something jarred there, then both of those scenarios do make some sense, right? Like a back spasm or a groin. But if he's not available for game 3, then advantage does continue to stay on the side of the Maple Leafs.
Yeah. We'll move over to the Jets versus the Golden Knights series here. Two general managers that you know very well, and organizations that you've dealt with a lot here. And you know, getting Stone back is such a huge add in the big game that he had last night. But not only he had, Brossoit had a bounce back game. It was not pretty at to start the game, but the Knights got going. How do you see this series shaping up now? Obviously, both teams kind of, in a way, have probably played their best games now.
Yeah.
It shifts back to Winnipeg. They're getting a lot of snow, but in the top of the whiteout that's going to be there. But how important is having Stone back in the lineup in this series for the Knights?
Well, don't take my word for it. Kelly McCrimmon and I had a conversation at recent GM meetings in Florida, and we talked about Stone. And at that point, he had no idea whether Mark Stone was going to be available for game 1 or not. He really, truly didn't, because, you know, that meeting was in March and Stone was coming off that surgery and was just really fresh into the rehabilitation. And, you know, they had to let him heal first and then start to strengthen and start to get things moving again, and then just see how he'd respond to all of that. Well, obviously, he got healthy in a hurry, but McCrimmon in that conversation in Florida said, you know what, with all due respect to all of our other veteran leaders, and there's a number of high character, high quality individuals playing for the Vegas Golden Knights, Mark Stone is our heart and soul. And, you know, you can see that. You could see that in game 2 last night. And it's not always because of the goals that you score, the points that you produce. It's just how you find ways to lift the team. You know, we've all watched game 1, and Winnipeg, for stretches of that game, large parts of it, in fact, dominated the Vegas Golden Knights. That was not a team that I thought was going to start the playoffs. So, you know, it's good that they bounced back in the fashion that they did, because now, you know, we're questioning how Winnipeg is going to respond. Yeah. And we weren't doing that in game 1. You know, based on the elements of how the Winnipeg Jets won game 1, I mean, everyone contributed there. You know, you had Kyle Connor, you had Dubois, you had Blake Wheeler scoring a big goal, you had Adam Lowry doing what he does, you had Connor Hellebuck doing what he does, and on it goes. So I think this is going to be a great series. I think it's a pick'em series.
Yeah.
But no different than the first game. Now you look at game 3 because it's a best of 5, and it feels like that's going to be a pivotal game in Winnipeg.
Yeah. Phil, we'll move over to you here to ask Dregs about the Oilers series and the Bruins Spurs Panthers series.
Yeah, we'll start with the Bruins and Panthers for sure.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. So Patrice Bergeron, a lot of questions around him. Are you hearing anything on him? Is he going to come back in this series? Is it an illness? Is it an injury?
No, it's injury, Phil. It is, and they finally in Boston made that official. I think he was dealing with a combination of things. I don't think that they were hiding anything. You know, they said, okay, he's banged up, but he's also sick, and by saying he's got an illness, well, then you could conjure, because they had a flu bug that went through that Boston dressing room, you could conjure up the idea, okay, well, he's not feeling well, and if he's banged up, why wouldn't you sit him? Because he can't play with 2 situations. But he's through the illness and wasn't available in game 2, so they acknowledged that he's hurt. If he doesn't play game 3, given what we saw and how Florida took over the third period against the Boston Bruins, then you know he's not just hurt, he's injured. And there's a difference there, right? Players play through being hurt all the time. They play with aches, they play with pains, they play with muscle strains, all of that stuff. If he's legit injured, then that's a problem clearly for Boston, because He does so many things so well, starting with the faceoffs and puck possession, which is a key element to any team's success, but certainly a key factor for the Boston Bruins. I feel like they're deep enough still that they'll find a way to prevail and get by the Florida Panthers. But Florida's going to have something to say about that. If Patrice Bergeron isn't available in game 3, then it's something that is more substantial and more serious.
Yeah.
And do the Boston Bruins make a goalie change? Like you said, after last game, Allmark kind of got lit up there. So is it time for Swayman to maybe make his appearance in this playoffs?
It would be for me, and that's not an indictment on Linus Ullmark at all. I mean, history tells us that to hoist that Stanley Cup, you've got to have an effective tandem in the playoffs. Well, how do you keep Swayman as sharp as he needs to be, and is probably going to have to be moving forward in the playoffs unless he gets some time? And this, again, isn't an indictment on Linus Ullmark. The Bruins didn't play well enough in the second half of that hockey game, and he's included in that. So give him a bit of a reset, give him an opportunity to rest, keep that crease competitive, and see what you get out of Swayman. The decision for me would be more difficult if Boston wins that game handily. Swayman plays incredibly well. Now, what do you do going into the next game? And it feels like you'd go back to Linus Ullmark because Ullmark has been so good and he's a top Vezina candidate. So there's no sense, creating what you have in balance into controversy by belaboring this. But they've got a fantastic 1-2 punch. It would make sense to me to put Swayman in.
And then one last thing on this series, I said it in our group chat for the 2 Mutts last night. I just feel like, I insert a guy like Sam Bennett on the Florida Panthers. Like I remember him in Calgary, like you get regular season Sam Bennett and then you get playoff Sam Bennett. And I just feel like this kid is just kind of built for the playoffs. So adding him into that Florida Panthers lineup, like what does that do for that team?
No, it's a huge lift, man. I don't know if the light just went on for Bennett when he landed in Florida. Maybe to say, look, I'm a better player than I was able to show for long stretches in Calgary. So now here's my opportunity. But he seems like such a good fit. And I love Sam Bennett's game. I do, because he's got elements of a little bit of everything there, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He can generate the offense. He's sound defensively, but he's also got some snarl and he's got some bite in his game. And you can't have enough of that. You just cannot, because it creates space for other players out there. But, Boston isn't afraid to play that style of hockey either. So the more guys you have pulling on the rope, the better you're going to be. I know that Paul Maurice, we've talked about Sam Bennett. He loves the way this guy plays the game. And he's been around the NHL a long time. So you've got the experience factor that always matters in the playoffs as well.
Hey, we can move over to Edmonton and LA now. So we're based out of Edmonton, and so we see this fan base, and this fan base is kind of all or nothing this season. They're ready for the Stanley Cup to come home. I just think it's important, and maybe you can speak on this, that, the LA Kings only finished 4 points behind the Edmonton Oilers, and for most of the season, we're ahead of the Oilers in the standings. So do you think the Oilers are kind of too much for the Kings to handle, or do you see this being a little closer than people think?
I think it's closer than people think. I do. Connor McDavid is going to have to find a way. He's going to have to find a way. I think he's played well, but we're talking about the best player in the game on the planet here. And historically, he's always found a way to break through, and I believe that he will in this series. And the reason it's not a bigger story is obvious, and that's because Leon Draisaitl has been an absolute beast through 2 games against the Los Angeles Kings. But you do have to give LA credit, and it's pretty obvious that Connor McDavid is a focus for them defensively, and they've checked him well. But McDavid's not alone, and Draisaitl's not going to be able to do it alone. So Ryan Nugent-Hopkins had a wonderful season. He's going to have to find a way to introduce himself offensively into this series. Zach Hyman had a great year. Zach Hyman is capable of scoring big goals at key times. He's proven that. He's going to have to find a way. And down the list you go. Evander Kane, maybe the empty netter is going to get him going, but he too is going to have to find a way to be a factor, to be an impactful player. It's not always the goals. It can be a big hit. It can, kind of stir things up. That's wheelhouse for Evander Kane. And I sound like I'm piling on the Oilers, and I don't mean to, and there's no reason to, given how things came together for them in game 2. They feel like they've played two good hockey games in this series, but they also know that the Los Angeles Kings are incredibly well coached. They've got tremendous leadership there. And if their goaltending stays in form in Korpisalo, that's going to be problematic as well. So Edmonton knows this series isn't going to be an easy one. They're going to have to earn 4 wins. I think it's going to be a fun one to watch the rest of it.
Yeah, I agree. Is there any update that you have on Kevin Fiala, Dregs, with him missing the first 2 games here?
No, not really. And I don't think that you can underestimate the significance of his absence, right? Because of what he can provide offensively. It's a best of 5 now, right? So, do you feel like you didn't dress him through 2 and you got through 2 with a split? It's okay. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if, and I don't have an update, so this is just my gut feeling on this, is they give him another game if he's that close, and maybe he isn't. Maybe they already know that he's not going to be available in either game.
Yeah.
We'll see in LA. But with players coming off the significance of that injury, you just want to give them as much time as possible. So if Todd McClellan feels that the LA Kings have enough left in the tank and the medical people are saying he's just flat out not ready, then he's not ready and he's not going to play. But I don't know that he's not going to be available at some point in this series.
Yeah, I agree. And any other series that you're most intrigued on, Dregs? We'll finish up on that. I know touch on it all, but I think maybe the Minnesota All-Stars is probably the biggest one, just because the parties involved and the hit and the Pavelski and all that, but just 2 great teams too, and somewhat of an intriguing storyline with the goaltending in Minnesota too.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are 2 series in the West that I'm intrigued by, other than the ones that we've already discussed, and Minnesota Dallas going in, I think it was easy to kind of earmark that as a series that was going to be nasty, right? It was going to have the elements of old school hockey. And we saw that in a big way in game 1 with, Matt Dumba rolling over Joe Pavelski. I would argue that hit was late. I mean, are we splitting hairs on it, getting the stopwatch out? Yeah, I guess we are.
Yeah.
Because it was somewhat predatorial as well. But there were, not to get into the role of Department of Player Safety, but when you're looking at a play like that, they deemed it to be a body check. The stick comes up with Hartman. So Pavelski takes a stick in the head and then hits his head on the ice and all of those things. Anyway, there was just an undertone of bite in that game, which we expected, and that carried over into game 2. I love the comments from Marc-Andre Fleury after giving up 7, where he was disgusted with himself, and unfairly, I would say, because Minnesota didn't play well in that game, but he felt like he needed to pick up where Gustafsson left them in game 1 with a real solid outing to open the playoffs, and he wasn't able to do that. So I think this is going to be a real good series. And then the other series in the West is the Seattle-Colorado series, man. I did not give the Kraken enough credit. I just flat out did not. I did give them enough credit to say that I thought they'd win a game, maybe 2 games in this series, and they'd come out firing in game 1 and win that. And then jump out to the 2-0 lead last night against the Avalanche. And then, they let the Avs off the mat, and Colorado takes advantage. So I think there's been a pretty big wake-up call for the defending Stanley Cup champions at the hands of the Seattle Kraken. If Colorado's going to win that series, and I still think they will, they're going to have to flat out earn it, because the Seattle Kraken are going down kicking, clawing, and scratching. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, you got that right. Well, Dregs, in a way too, this is nice to kind of have you on with us here. This is kind of our first episode together with the whole Go Goat family here, and you've been, as we said many times before, with us. You've been amazing to us here at the 2 Months Podcast. So it's nice to have you on. It's nice to kind of our podcasts on the same network there. And
Yeah.
Together, and I appreciate the love that you gave me on your episode the other day with the question that you and Ray had. So. All the best to you.
Hey, did you get a free hat, by the way?
They did send me they asked me for my address. I haven't gotten anything yet. So
okay.
I did get the DM from the social media department there. But
hey, Phil, you got to come up with better questions, bud.
Yeah.
With all due respect to the hat that I'm seeing you wear here today in the episode, man, Ray and Dregs hockey podcast cap from Botano.ca would be perfect for you.
There you go, Phil.
I'll send you my address too then, Dregs.
No, you got to ask a legit question first.
Yeah, you just don't get free things. You got to
nothing free on Ray and Dregs.
No, you got to come up with a good question. It has to be worthy of something, Phil. So Phil's still in his rookie laps here. So
no, come on.
Dregs, all the best to you, man. And we're looking forward to kind of seeing you here on the tube with the TSN coverage too, and keep up the great work with the podcast. And I hope you have some great time here doing some golfing as the weather gets better too. So
yeah, well, we're recording this on Friday morning, and I've got a 2:20 tee time. I'm not going in studio tonight. Okay. Back tomorrow for the Leaf game. Okay. So we'll see. Second round of the year. I'm a little nervous about it, but looking forward to some fresh air. And as always, Josh, Phil, thanks for having me. You're two of my favorites, and we'll do it again soon.
For sure. Thanks, Drake.
Thanks, Drake.
Thanks to Darren Dreger for joining us this morning on the 2 Months Podcast. That was awesome, as it always is when we have Dregs on. So I really appreciate him. Phil, anything that kind of stood out to you besides Dregs kind of chirping you a bit there, but anything that stood out to you in that interview? Maybe Flames playoff stuff. Probably more Flame stuff to you, I guess.
Well, it's just, I guess this is my announcement. This is my last pod.
Retiring, Dregs.
Dregs just totally demoralized me, basically told me I suck. Yeah. No, it was great. It was great having him on. It's just the more the days unfold with this Calgary Flames team, the bigger it seems like it's just a mess over there. So getting a little bit of insight on Calgary situation it is always good, and it's always nice to get the inside information, like right from the sources and the guys you trust. So really great having him on, talking about that stuff, and maybe you can talk about what Dregs had to say about the playoffs.
Yeah, you know what? Just to touch on the Flames, like, even thinking this yesterday and seeing Kelsey Snow's post on Instagram, and knowing the whole situation that we know with the Snow family, and then obviously we saw how emotional Brad was when he was asked about him or at the trade deadline in the press conference. It just hurts, in a way, like, to see Brad leave this organization after 9 years, because I think he's done an amazing job with this organization, not only on the ice, off the ice. I can speak to what he's done for me off the ice, and he didn't, it's not like when he requires a player, that player, the player obviously is there to make an impact on the ice and, get the team in the playoffs and all that. And, when they, picked up the player that helped me out, and the organization helped me out too, so I always will have allegiance and support and defend Brad Treliving. But it still hasn't sunk in. It still doesn't feel right that he has parted ways with this organization. I think when it does, that will be an emotional one. And I wouldn't be surprised start hearing things of some other people in the organization that might follow him wherever he goes, and maybe he just takes a year off, or maybe as Dreg said, that and Doug McLean brought it up in past episodes with us too, right, that maybe he joins the Toronto Maple Leafs. All depends what Toronto does in the first round here, or maybe he goes to the Penguins, or or whatnot. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's unfortunate how this is kind of all played out. Because how great Brad is, and my family has dealt with the Sutter family a little bit through the farming industry, and obviously we've had Brent Sutter on this podcast twice, and he's always been amazing to us whenever we want to get him on or have a conversation or whatever. But yeah, I just think in that aspect it's a bit emotional, and it hasn't really hit home. It's like that breakup that you don't know how it was, and maybe it takes some time, because obviously there's a lot of players that like him too. And then we'll see what happens with Daryl. Like, I agree everything that Tyler Toffoli has said publicly about Daryl. I would say the same, and it just sucks that it wasn't able to work between the both in the working relationship. It's good to hear that they have a good personal relationship, but the working relationship was tough. But and that's sometimes this happens in this industry, or happens in the walk of life of any other job that's out there. But we'll see what happens going forward. But Daryl hasn't spoke to the media yet, and again, as we record this early Friday morning, maybe it's later Friday that he does, or maybe it's the weekend. It's maybe he's dissecting of all the exit meeting stuff that gets back to him and whatnot. But hopefully this situation gets rectified soon. But we'll see. There's obviously you don't want to jump into you don't want to make a rash decision, and obviously it seems you know Conroy is in line to being the next general manager, and I agree everything.
And well deserved. I think it's well deserved for
Correct.
Conroy.
Correct. Yeah. And you said it, and it's been on other places. Does Conroy bring his buddy Jerome McGinley? Does Jerome show up in an assistant general manager's role? Does Jerome, like, I don't know if Jerome shows up on the bench, but is Jerome back a part of this organization after this?
Does Jerome want to?
Yeah, and
There's so many questions, right?
100%. And because you normally bring your own guys, and I think another guy to be, he's obviously under term. He's on an NHL bench right now, but Alex Tanguay, now he's an assistant coach in the NHL. So obviously,
Yeah.
like, you'll see what happens there in the near future. But that's another guy that was close to this situation with Conroy before, and obviously Jerome. But because normally you do
Well,
bring
what kind of a lift would that give like the fan base though too, right? Like
yeah,
to bring back a guy like Jerome. And
100%.
we're not saying that Jerome's name is even out there, but
No, but I do think it gives you some kind of some kind of comfort in some which way, and that's up to him to make that call. And his kids are getting older, but does he still want to be around? And obviously they're his daughter's doing her thing, and his other two boys are doing their thing right now, and one's in the WHL, the other one's projected to be another amazing player in Joe. So Tej is doing really well, and so we'll see what happens there. If he still wants to, if does he get the itch? Is it something? And something that stood out to me too is, like, in a in a interview that Rod Brendamore had with Elliot Friedman on his podcast last week or so. Rod was an assistant coach and was only at the home games for a while. So now maybe that's different, because maybe he was able to do that then. As Rod said, like, it's either you're all in or you're all out. So, but he's still able to kind of be around the kids and the family. But Jerome set up in Kelowna, and he's always had his home in Kelowna. And I don't think now he moved back after being in Boston for quite some time. But yeah, we'll see. There'll be an interesting offseason here in Calgary, and it still, as day by day, it still gets a little bit more interesting. We'll see when Daryl speaks, and what Daryl has to say when he speaks, or if the organization has something else that they need to put out about that. But it does seem like all signs are pointing to him staying. There's a lot of money left on that contract, and it's only 2 years, but maybe there's one more year they can try to run it back. But yeah, we'll wait and see there. And then as for the playoffs, yeah, it was a big win. last night
You're
for a
feeling
while.
better. You're feeling better today, buddy.
Yeah, yeah, as a Leaf fan,
I
yes, but
Yeah, I know you talked about it on the food interview a bit that we did record after that game one Maple Leafs game, and you were just a little too emotional that night, so we
yeah,
had to get rid of that interview. So
yeah, we didn't publish that, so that goes
no,
to the deleted file, and maybe one day it gets aired or not. So, but yeah, no, just a little bit shocking, as I said to you. I just don't see you getting 7 goals on Vasilevsky. It obviously happens, so it's just that's the shocking thing in hockey is expect the unexpected because you just never know what's going to happen on any given night. And I think also Dregs talked about a good thing too is let's not count the Kings out. You teed it up perfectly. They only finished a few points behind them. They were ahead of them most.
also I did ask a good question.
Yeah, yeah, he did. So but yeah, I just I don't count them out. And obviously, if they get Fiala back at any which way, then maybe that's it. And maybe the schedule shows because they got that big break between 5 and 6 with the when they go back to LA that with the Lakers and the Clippers playing. There's a possibility of maybe he plays later in the series if it extends to game 6 and game 7, and that gives him the extra rest that maybe he needs. But we'll see what happens today. It's very early this morning on Friday. There's a game tonight. We'll see if he's in the lineup, but we don't know what's
Yeah,
happening. And all these situations in the playoffs are very day to day and very locked up. Really, the only time is when warm up starts, if that player's on the ice. Very rare that they're gonna disclose much information before the puck drop. But we'll see. And
well, and on that series, I just sometimes wonder too if the Kings are okay with the Oilers coming out guns a-blazing and they just, weather the storm, maybe give up a couple of goals. But those veterans on that team, they know they can come back because they've done it twice against the Oilers now when the Oilers come out guns a-blazing and score 2 quick goals.
now
So
what happens if the Kings score the first goal? Now, what's the rebuttal back? Like, what would happen for the Oilers? Obviously, we're seeing a trend. If you score the first goal of the game, you're often winning. I think I think the Oilers did score obviously in their first game they scored, but they lost. The Jets scored the first goal of the game and they lost. So it's very rare that
Seattle too last night, right?
yeah, Seattle too. So there has been a weird trend. It wasn't trending that way the first couple days, but as we get set for night 5 of the NHL playoffs, it has happened a few times where you have scored and you haven't won. But obviously, more often than not, in the history of hockey in the playoffs, if you score first, you're typically going to win the game. So, but Edmonton's situation where they both scored first and they both let the Kings back in to tie it, that is an intriguing storyline. I don't think Stuart Skinner's played the best, but I also don't think the LA Kings have given him their best either. And Todd McCullough
Right.
talked about it yesterday. Is they haven't played their game yet, and they're 1-1. They're going home. They like their chances in their barn. The matchup probably will stay the same. They've done a great job on McDavid and just being inside of all 5 of those players being inside of his gear. But as we know, Connor McDavid is Connor McDavid, and he is often due for quite the outburst. And you got to give credit where credit's due. Leon Draisaitl is number 2 in the history of the NHL for points per game in the playoffs, right behind Wayne Gretzky. Connor McDavid is 5. So what Leon Draisaitl has been able to do is remarkable from the moment he stepped into the NHL to the playoffs. And during that first kind of cup run where they lost Anaheim, Draisaitl kind of did put the team on his back. McDavid had, I think, 9 points in 13 games, and Draisaitl had quite a few points in those first 2 rounds. And you know, as like we said, we talked with Stoff during his interview too. They obviously still blew a 3-goal lead, but there was the situation in that Kessler was holding Talbot's pad and whatnot. But the fact you're up 3-0 with 3 minutes left and you're giving it back, and let them off the hook. We'll see. We'll see where things are at. I still think they're a bit inexperienced in that lineup. I still think they got to go through another, wave here of learning before, because I do think for me with Edmonton personally, and this is not because I'm a Leaf fan or whatever. I just think as a hockey fan, I don't think this is the year. I think next year is kind of the year because I think you still need to learn and go through some growing pains and whatnot. And but anything can happen. They could easily win. They could be destined to win. When you got a guy like Drysdale and what he's doing, how is it hard to count them out? But in a way, I still feel like there's some inexperience there. But the Kings have done a
Well,
good
look at their
job.
goaltending, right?
Yeah, and
Like Stuart Skinner got his first playoff win the other night.
yeah,
And like not taking anything away, Stu's had a great year. He's been awesome this year. And could he be like the could he take this team to the cup? Absolutely.
100%.
Any goalie could, right? Any goalie can get hot and win a series.
Yeah, and the guy down at the
But
and Corpusalo's done it twice where he's stolen series, and he's played pretty great right now, and we'll see what they do when they get home here. Some big games, and let's see. The Bruins are in tough too, right?
absolutely. And I talked about it in the interview, and maybe I'll just get your take on this too, because I know when Sam Bennett was in Calgary, like I think he was like your favorite player on the Flames, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken.
Yeah.
But like I said, and Dregs talks about it really good, like, and listeners have already heard that take from Dregs, but like what's your take on Sam Bennett?
I think he's a gamer, man, and in every which way. Like, how many times has he fought Darnell Nurse and he hasn't even lost that fight? It's always been an even fight, or maybe he's got the better of it. It's never really and this he can fight, he can hit. He's a playoff player through and through. It's my favorite Ontario Hockey League team is the Kingston Frontenacs. Doug Gilmour had his hands in that organization. Doug Gilmour's my favorite player. Sam Bennett wore 93 in Calgary. Um, like and just tying to that is, I think there's just something about him in the playoffs, and that was a tough one to go. But I give Brad credit. That was tough for him to do that trade, but at that time, that was what was needed for
He
Sam.
wasn't working. He
Yeah,
wasn't working in Calgary.
yeah, and maybe it would have worked if he had, somewhat of a different coach or whatever. Maybe a different veteran around him. Who knows? But he's been everything that the Panthers have wanted him to be since he's gone to that organization. And he was an element in that game too that they didn't have in game one. That was a huge difference. And if he could stay healthy, your upset of the first round could come through here because you picked it before the pucksy was even dropped that you would have the Panthers winning in 7 here. And we'll see what the Bruins do, what they answer back with, and if Bergeron plays and whatnot. This is what we kind of talked about all year, some adversity that they're facing right now that they really haven't faced all year, and that is right in front of them right now with losing in the fashion that they did, and not having their captain too. And we know what he's been able to play through: punctured lung and torn bicep before and all that. So obviously what he is having right now is substantial for him to not be in the lineup in the first 2 games. So we'll see if he plays game 3, but the Panthers go home. And Drags touch on it too. I'm surprised that the Kraken have done this in a way, but I've watched a lot of Kraken games, and I did kind of expect a big push from this team. And everyone still wants to count you out. And at the end of the day, like we talk about in that locker room or this locker room or any of these locker rooms, there's some proud players in there, regardless of what the experts and the guys like us and all these other people want to say. Count you out. You don't think the LA Kings are looking at that and being like, all right, so you guys are going to win the cup, eh? So we don't have a say in that, same with Seattle.
Right.
You guys won the cup last year. You don't think that we might have a say in that, like
And the Panthers too,
yeah,
to
yeah,
the Boston Bruins.
yeah, exactly. So and Toronto too didn't play a first game, and everyone's like, okay, so we're done, we're out. Okay, all of us, our fans, are counting us out, so we don't have a say. But it's a long series. It's like we say, it's not a one and done. They're best of sevens for a reason, and we'll see where things go. But yeah, and it does look like the Devils are in over their head. So that's one series that might just not be where the experience matters. They have done a playoff run before against the Lightning. They won 1 game. But maybe this is what that quarter of that organization needs, is just another one. I wouldn't fire Lindy, and I wouldn't make any rash decisions in New Jersey if they lose out in the first round, even if they get swept. That team is going to be a force to be reckoned with going forward here. So you just got to get
Yeah, this is just the beginning for them.
Yeah, you just got to get the experience. You got to get in. You got to get in. And there's not a lot of there is veterans there, but there's more younger youth than there is older veterans in that team. And it's weird saying because you got a guy like Palat, who's one of the most remarkable playoff players ever, and I think Dougie Hamilton's a great player too. And you got Severson and you got Smith on the back end and whatnot, but maybe more up front. You need a little bit more veteran presence. And like sometimes you gotta, as I always, these teams that have won, they've always said when the teams that have won, they've always said we gotta learn how to lose to learn how to win. And so
right.
And we'll see what happens there. And but yeah, anything that stands out to you before we close out on that?
Yeah, like just your comment there about like, you got to learn how to lose to learn how to win. And like the person that comes to mind when I think of that is like Sidney Crosby when he lost in the finals to Detroit.
Yeah.
And like I remember like there was that commercial on TV with like you just knew like he lost that series, he wasn't going to lose the next one.
Yeah.
Right.
Next one, and
So
he won the next three that he's been in, right? So
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So really, really quick though, before we go, I was just gonna ask you, Carolina, New York Islanders, who you got tonight?
Man, I got the Islanders a little going home. Maybe losing Teravainen is a big shock, but at some point here, Puljujärvi's got to get in and got to do something too for the Canes. And the opportunity is right there for him if he gets back in. But Sorokin hasn't played his best. Varlamov is pretty good in the playoffs too. Yeah, I think the Islanders squeak this one out, but I had them in 7, so I had the Islanders in 7 here. So I'm not gonna now after 2 games hold off on that. I still think that they'll make this a series, and maybe that's the turning point. Maybe that unfortunately that injury for the Canes is the one injury that that may derail them, but it's tough too, man. Because I listened to that interview with Rod Brendamore, and I want to go through a wall for that guy. And I've said it on multiple times. Like I think there's so many great coaches in this league, but I think Rod Brendamore is one of the best, if not the best. For a lot of reasons, and it's hard to count him out. And I know there's pressure on him, as he said it in his interview with Elliott too. He's just like, we gotta get over the hump, or I'm not back, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So it's been tough, man. Missing 70 goals now, probably 90 goals with Teravainen out. That's tough, and you can't replace it. There's no one out there you're gonna go and get. So
yeah, you're not going to put Puljujärvi in there, and he's gonna make that up for you for sure.
Yeah, you would want
and then
it's not there right now for him. And I hope we see Puljujärvi back in the NHL next year, because I do think this year was a wash. Some
good person.
Yeah, like everything you hear of him is amazing. I know that the public, some of the media here in Edmonton said that he went through a bad breakup, man. Like, I went through a bad breakup like in the last 11 months here. And it like I finally, in the last 3-4 weeks here, have finally got out of that. I was in a deep and dark place for many years or many months here. And at the end of the day, regardless of whatever you do, it doesn't, if you're making $3 million a year, or you're making $100,000 a year or $50,000 a year, whatever, and you go through something like that, it's tough. And like
right.
I know Jason Dreger tweeted that out, and that for him that really put him in a tough spot. And so
it wasn't really fair.
But... No. So but yeah, and
also
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say too, the Canes are also getting Frederik Andersen back tonight. Do you think he goes in, or do they stick with Ranta?
I think they stick with Ranta. Anderson backed up the first game and then didn't back up the second game, but I still think you run Ranta here, and it's we'll see what happens there. But he's done pretty well for them so far. And as much as I'd love to see Freddie get through here, but It's just injuries and stuff for him have been a tough go, and his
Yeah.
best ability is availability, and at times he hasn't been available when they most needed, and so they're going with Ranta. So it's been a bit of a change up for that. But yeah, it's tough to bet against the Canes too, but I do think somewhat the Islanders got to bounce back here and get something going.
I agree. I think the Islanders get this is going to be their one win of the series is tonight.
It could be,
They're gonna get some an emotional lift from their fans.
Yeah.
I think they're gonna do it tonight. Boston, Florida, who you got tonight?
I got Florida in this one. So I did pick the Bruins to win the series, but I do think Alex Lyon's done well. We'll see if Bergeron plays, but I do got the Panthers winning this one tonight. So they're not winning the series.
I think
winning this one tonight.
I think Boston bounces back and they win tonight.
Win tonight. Okay.
Dallas, Minnesota, who you got tonight?
I got Dallas. I like Dallas's makeup here. But yeah, they're gonna do it for little Joe here. So I do think they pull this one out. The sticks were firing last game. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Jake Ottinger shuts the door tonight and Dallas wins.
Yeah.
What's Minnesota gonna do in that?
I think I think they learned the lesson here, and I think they're just gonna ride with Gustafsson in case he falls off at some point. But he's been the better goaltender. I don't think they go back to this back and forth. In my opinion, I think they learned a very valuable lesson. Unless he's hurt, and that's why they did it. Who knows? It was a longer game, and maybe tweak something. But they have done this split down the stretch here in the last 14 games, but. I think here, in my opinion, I think you just got to ride the one goaltender. I think it's tough to go back and forth with different goaltenders in the playoffs. It's just really, we haven't seen it. Jeff Merrick says, until we see it and someone wins, then everyone will start doing it. But right now, it just really hasn't worked out. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you.
Yeah.
Especially Marc-Andre Fleury comes out in the media and basically said he was terrible. He sucked.
Yes.
We had that same situation with I think Markstrom did it this year. Campbell did it this year.
Yeah, it has.
And both times when those guys did it, they were in pretty low places in the season, right? So for Marc-Andre Fleury, but then again, you look at Marc-Andre Fleury, how do you bet against Marc-Andre Fleury? The guy took the Vegas Golden Knights to the
Stanley Cup
Finals. How many Stanley Cups did he win with
Penguins? Yep.
With the Penguins too, and what he did with the Penguins, it's he's just
a Hall of
he's a
Famer,
perfect
right?
backup at this. Yeah, and he's like a perfect backup for a guy like Gustafsson.
Yeah.
At this point in his career, how could you you're not going to find much more experience from a goaltender in the playoffs besides maybe you've got Quick backing up in Vegas right now too, so
yeah.
It's just it's good to see these older guys still getting a crack.
Yeah,
but you feel for a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury, he can be better, so
for
but
sure.
I kind of agree with you. I think they go with Gustafsson again, unless there's something there where he might be injured. But at the end of the day, Marc-Andre Fleury is a pretty good consolation in net for Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And then last but not least, we're heading to LA tonight for the Oilers and the Kings. What do you think's going to happen?
I think it's another close one, another 1-goal game. I do think the Oilers win this one, and I do think the Kings win game 4, and it comes back to Edmonton 2-2. I do think the Oilers squeak one out here, and at some point here, McDavid's got to get going, so get a couple goals. So that's kind of what I figure. And then LA will kind of have a bounce back in game 4. Your thoughts?
I think the Kings win tonight.
Okay.
And I think it's gonna be kind of similar to what happened in Edmonton, where and I said it with the Islanders, I don't know, I just feel like that home ice and that your fans in your first playoff game, and we we said it before, like just the experience on this Kings team, like
Yeah.
the Droughties, the Kopitars, it's those. I just feel like they're gonna have this team ready to go, and like how can you say a bad word about Todd as well? Like he's gonna have this team ready to go, I think, at home tonight.
Yeah. Very well could. They'll be fired up in the crypto.com arena. So they'll be
Crypto, yeah.
crypto. Yeah.
I also agree. I think it's coming back to Edmonton Tide 2-2 though.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think they'll split in LA.
All right. So we'll be back with another episode in a few days. Pretty much it's episode day off for us. So we're every second day we're kind of doing one. So we'll be back. I guess that would be Saturday around there, or Sunday around that time for another episode to break
Sunday.
down. Sunday would be Sunday would be the next one, and we'll break down these nights and Saturday night, and then preview the night ahead on Sunday. So Phil, thanks for jumping in and getting chirped by Dregs again. So you got to pay your dues, man. Dregs don't hold back, man. So
Ruthless. He's
yeah,
ruthless.
exactly. So all right, bud. Yeah, well, everyone enjoy the day, and enjoy some hockey tonight. Drive safe out there, and be well, be kind, and we're thinking of all these positive things that are happening right now in the hockey world. So keep it up, and we'll chat very soon.